Welcome to Designing Cities for All, another episode. And it's part of our 2-year-long activity and research program,
where we take a deep dive into designing products, spaces, and systems for all.
Just because you feel safe or you feel welcome or you feel included doesn't mean that everyone else around you feels the same way.
We don't stand alone. We're not individuals that somehow a planet or an island, you know?
And I think that's the beautiful thing of a diverse society, that everyone can add something from out of their own experience.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
I think if you can build relationships and use design as a tool to build those relationships, the better off we're all going to be.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
Belonging is a very, very important concept.
You can try to take someone's place for a while, but you don't have the lived experience.
Let's begin by acknowledging similarity and affinity.
Be a person, not your role.
I think inclusion is not a choice.
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
In order to create truly inclusive public spaces that are accessible to everyone, we have to underline what everyone actually is.
Real inclusion, it's got nothing to do with the norm, but it's like something that we create from all different perspectives.
You know, so even when we bring everybody at the table, does everybody's voice count the same?
Because it's a big question of who tells these stories.
You know, the more I explore about other cultures, other religions, is the more ingredients I have to make the architecture and to answer the questions I get from society.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
Yeah, welcome to this episode. My name is Lindsay Beda. I'll be the moderator of this conversation tonight, where we will speak with the Chrononauts, episode 2. What you just saw was the wrap-up of the first year of Designing Cities for All, and this 2-year program of research and activities takes a deep dive into designing products and places and systems for all, as my colleague just explained. And next to designers and scientists and experts and educational institutes and other partners, there's also 6 fellows that were invited to curate part of the program. And the 2 that we are with today are the Chrononauten, the Chrononauts. In their Designing Cities for All fellowship, Chrononauts Edwin Gardner and Christian Bruno, futurists, rethink the shape of trust and democracy in the digital age. And together with you, the audience, and with special guests and thinkers, we will explore how to build new architectures of trust in a changing world in this digital era. And in this second episode, we'll be focusing on what a healthy digital culture looks like, in which we can actually trust each other online, in which people trust each other online. How could we design for that, or how could that come to exist? Because indeed we have lost a lot of the trust in one another, and we forget that we're actually dealing with real humans online, often resulting in all kinds of anonymous racist and homophobe and other hateful exchanges that maybe further diminish the trust that we could have between each other. And we will reflect on this with the Chrononauts and with 2 speakers. I'll super briefly introduce them now. We have Nanda Piersma sitting next to me here. And Nanda is a lecturer of responsible IT at the Hogeschool van Amsterdam and a scientific director at the HVA Expertise Center for Applied Artificial Intelligence. Welcome, Nanda.
Thank you.
Very happy that you could join us. And then joining online, we have Jona de Jong. Jona, hi.
Hi.
Hi there. Jona, you're a PhD researcher at the European University Institute and currently based at NYU, New York University, in New York, obviously. And you researched depolarization between people with different political stances. So we're going to hear all about that as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. We also have an artist with us today who I really love. Benjamin Fro, a protest singer, song, rapper. You will hear from him midway the program. Thank you for being here as well. All right. welcome also to people watching and those who could make it here. Very nice. We'd love to include you as well in the conversation. If you're watching at home and you have any questions, go to menti.com. That's the tool we're using. So menti.com, and you use the code 28081914. And you can ask your questions in question rounds every time. And welcome. Hi. And and if you're here and you want to ask a question in those question rounds, just raise your hand. Okay, let's get started with you guys, Edwin and Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I just explained in my pretty long intro, we're discussing digital public culture and interpersonal trust this time. Last time we spoke about trust in sources and information online. Now we speak about trust in each other, in other humans. Why did you want to discuss this topic in the series?
Well, because of course, a big part, I think, of the public sphere is not just the newspaper or this kind of big canon about information and what we think is true. It is also very much about everyday social discourse. How do we meet online? How do we exchange information? Or how do we come into insights or go into dialogue with each other? And what role does this new digital environment play in how that discourse takes place? And I think, or at least it's our position, it's fundamentally different from, let's say, the printed word, the activated word currently, if we look at social media and how it impacts.
The activated word, you explained that last time, as in what we're creating online. It's not just like taking in information, it's like...
No, it's two-way traffic, of course. One of the big differences is, it's not a television station or an editorial board with a newspaper where it's basically one to many. It's now many to many. Everybody can basically, of course, interact with each other, and which results in very new dynamics like virality, sharing stuff, but also, of course, fake news, filter bubbles, polarization. All these issues are very much tied with this new information environment we're in.
And if we make it like the urgency of this topic concrete, what do you think we're able to achieve as a society if we trust each other online versus if we don't?
I think so we're moving towards a more digital society, and mostly that is approached from a market perspective. I think if you look at how the EU approaches how to regulate digitalization, they very much approached it from a market perspective, and I think it makes much more sense to approach it from a public domain or public sphere perspective. And then we ask, what is a public domain and what should it do? And we sort of feel now it does like three things. It allows a community to share and order information, and it produces a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And the third one, it creates a basis on which public decision-making and public execution can be based.
Yeah.
And I think the second one is, and I think that's also how we ordered these three evenings. And I think the second one is, I think the question behind it is, how can the digital sphere produce community?
Right.
How can it, not only so people should be kept safe, obviously, but also it should produce or reproduce common values, common norms, common identities, etc.
Yeah, interesting.
So, and that's the question I think that we want to explore with this speculative sessions.
And what are you hoping to get out of it tonight?
Well, we're here to learn. So I think we'll present or kind of extend the speculation we started with the previous session.
Mm-hmm.
And we're curious to speculate further with our guests and to learn from them. To how can it be augmented, or should things be differently, or can we have a new perspective on them. So basically, we're looking to enrich our thinking and that of our guests and audience.
And why with these two guests?
Well, I think they both have been working particularly on these topics. So, like, how does public discourse take shape? How does the digital kind of influence how that happens? So I think our guests can help us like broaden our view and deepen our insights.
Yeah, great. So let's go to our guests to briefly get to know you a little bit better. Nanda, I'd love to start with you. You have a lectoraat. What's the English word for that?
Professorship.
Professorship, yeah, exactly. Around responsible IT at the HVA. How do you connect the two? Responsible IT, responsibility IT. What does it have to do with each other?
It was made by the HVA together with the municipality of Amsterdam, who has a lot of responsibility for its citizens. And they said, we need someone to help us think about what is responsible IT. So I don't know yet.
That's what you're there to research.
We do have a number of design principles of how we can change the current way that we are building IT systems. So I studied mathematics and I'm in IT, and I love to program, love to do coding, much better than go to some seminar or whatever. Love to code. And then I realized that we are working from very old views on how IT should be developed. You mentioned the market push for IT development. Well, that's something that we are stuck with now. And at the same time, a lot of people have the ability now to use a lot of free apps, free digital software. And the whole idea of everybody is part of the digital world and still don't really know how it works, and they don't need to know how it works, but they need to trust it.
Yeah.
So that's why we started a research group in responsible IT.
And what does your research focus on?
Well, what we realized is that we can develop the systems differently to make them responsible by design. We have privacy by design.
So those
one
design
of the
principles
topics
that you just mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm quite optimistic that we can build it if we just look into how the models are made and how AI is working, and just changing it and make, for instance, some systems interoperable would be really easy to do. We have the technology, we're just not doing it.
Right. Interesting. So that's one of the principles you're looking into, interoperability. You just mentioned privacy, I think.
Privacy, interoperability, trustworthy AI. We're looking at transparency. Well,
transparency,
I have some critical notes about it. Some companies translate transparency in explaining us how the algorithm gets your data.
Right.
I don't care how they do that.
Yeah.
I just want to know, how does the algorithm decide?
Yeah.
So we are critical on how are the ethical systems used, and how can we make them work for the people
and change practice if you know what's happening. Yeah. And lastly, you on the December the 6th, actually, you will be back here in Pakhuis presenting your book next door. System error, please restart. During your inaugural speech. And what I wanted to just super briefly zoom in on, in the book, there's also a little part around interpersonal trust in the digital age, what we're talking about today. So without going all the way into it, what are some of the main insights, main findings that you'll describe on this topic?
Well, on the topic of interpersonal trust, we should take back our own perspective of what we can do. And we make a lot of decisions when we use digital tooling, and we don't have enough hands to change the way we are doing it. And on the other side, we're looking at the developers, and developer says no. It's not system says no, developer says no. I'm not going to build a system in this way.
So it's like very concentrated. Who decides how?
Who decides what we are using and how we are using it? So both the users and the developers have a say here. It's not just big tech and the system says no, and this is the way we are using it currently, but with very small differences or understanding the systems in a different way without understanding the code, we can organize interpersonal trust.
Yeah, great. Good to get a little sense of where you're coming from, what you're working on.
I'm not sure how it works, but we are trying to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find out together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll have time to go deeper into each of these. I would love to invite Jona into the conversation as well and get a little bit of a feel of where you're coming from, Jona. So as I just said, you're doing your PhD, you're currently in New York. What are you researching there? What are you working on all the way on the other side of the pond?
Well, in general, my main interest is in the relationship between interactions between people, especially between people who have different views or are from different societal groups, and depolarization, which means both, do people come to understand each other a little bit better? Do they become to trust each other a little bit more? But also, do they start to feel a bit of sympathy for each other? And more specifically for, I think, this program, I'm interested in whether, short discussions between people with different political views online in a newly created space also depolarize.
Interesting. So you do connect depolarization straight away to trust and even sympathy, you said. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so originally polarization was often identified in terms of disagreement, right? We are polarized when we disagree on certain political polarization, I should say. So we disagree on certain issues, and so we're polarized. But this is also at the same time not necessarily a big problem, because it's also vital for healthy democracy that there are different views and that parties mobilize on those different views. What is, however, more damaging in theory on a societal level is that people with different political views strongly dislike each other. And this is a trend that we've been seeing to increase in several countries. Not that much in the Netherlands, luckily, but in the US, of course, hugely, and also in Great Britain and a couple of other countries. And what I wanted to see is whether, a conversation about something you disagree on, especially, which is quite rare, makes you paradoxically even almost like the other side of the political spectrum more.
Okay, so you're saying a couple of things here. It's quite rare to even talk to someone you disagree with at all. But if you do, you're likely to actually understand them better. Is that what you say?
Yeah, exactly. So people's, let's say, offline environments tend to be quite politically homogeneous. People tend to surround each other themselves with people who have quite similar views. And even if there is disagreement, there's a tendency for people to avoid that a bit because you want to keep the relation good, right? So you're not going to really probe on the things you very strongly disagree about. It happens, but it doesn't happen much. And then online, and we can go into it maybe a bit more later, there actually is more and more research that shows that people are exposed to people with different political views. So there's exposure, but there's limited opportunity for constructive engagement and interaction, right? Because your group is watching, let's say, all my friends see it when I post something or when I respond to someone. And so, but we're going to go there next, I guess. What I was interested in is if you just put people together, if you build something that allows people with very different views to have a brief conversation about something that they are divided on, what happens, right? And the intuition is, well, that's not going to go well, right? Because, but what I'm finding is, it's not as if they suddenly love each other, but they hate each other a bit less, and understanding increases, and importantly, people become more willing to engage with each other as well. So engage with someone they disagree with, which is something many people find quite scary.
Yeah, indeed. And I think I do too. Can you, in that light, say a little bit about Civink, one of the tools that you researched?
Yeah, so Civink is an NGO, and then now there's a company side as well, that was founded by Leon Horbach and Ruben Treurniet. And what they do is they essentially build a tool to, as they put it, burst bubbles. So they have a tool that anonymously connects people with different views in all kinds of situations to have these brief chat conversations about things that they are divided on. And as a part of this organization, what they also do is they launch this tool. They have launched this tool broadly in Dutch society in the run-up to elections to match people with different political views. And that's where I came in, essentially.
Is that a cliffhanger?
Oh, sorry. No, I thought. So what we did. No, so indeed. So I was interested, of course, in the results of this. Like, what does this do? So in the run-up to the 2021 general election in the Netherlands, for 5 weeks, they collaborated with a couple of media partners and with the Stemwijzer, so a big vote advice application, to try to get people to use this, to see if people would even use this. So this is a video, this is a promo video of the you see on the, and it was quite a surprising success in the sense that a lot of people did use it. The data is a bit unclear on like how many individual users we had, but we're estimating between 100,000 and 300,000.
That's quite a lot, yeah. Well, what was like your number one key insight from evaluating that process or that tool, how it worked?
That it overall tended to work, but not, let's say, as sort of a silver bullet solution. So I then made more of a sort of clean experiment with the same tool in the UK, where people are more polarized and just had people talk for 10 minutes. And the main thing is people really do start to hate each other less, and they want to engage with each other more. But it's not necessarily, as you would expect, something people find incredibly easy or pleasant. But they are quite sort of relieved and more willing to do it after. So it's hard, but maybe necessary.
Interesting. Thank you, Jona, for now.
Thank you.
We're gonna go and listen to a second scenario by the Chrononauts in a bit, who will take us on a brief trip once again. And as I just mentioned in the beginning, if you're watching at home and you have any questions, then please do let us know through Mentimeter, menti.com, and then use the code 28081914. And people here in the room can just raise their hands in the question rounds, of course, and we'll happily take your perspectives along as well. All right. Are you ready, Edwin?
Yes, I'm ready.
Take it away.
The microphone
ready?
Working? Is it also? Yes, it's also ready. Okay. Let's put up the slides. Can I? Yes. Okay. Last week, we took you to 2093, and we were witness to an interview with Jopie Chef Arends, who you can see here on the chair on the left on the picture. And she was also known as the Marshall McLuhan of the 21st century, so a big media scholar. She told us about how early in the 21st century citizens acquired new superpowers through the digital revolution. Superpowers that transformed them from periodical receivers of broadcasts to receiving and sending information from anywhere, anytime, all the time. Jopie explained us that this new and intense relationship with information and knowledge had put stress on the trusted authorities of the early 21st century. Because the old institutions of trust were still based on the information technology that was foundational for modernity, the printed word. And now these old institutions weren't fit for the emerging age of the activated word. Citizens of the early 20th century increasingly felt that centralized bureaucratic institutions were untransparent and unaccountable, and that experts and professionals couldn't really be trusted on their word, because there were always second opinions, conflicting research, and alternative facts that presented a different story. The digital age thus demanded a new architecture of trust, one that was intrinsically digital, but that took time, as Jopie explained. In the 2020s, it were still the big monopolies with secret algorithms and walled gardens that provided the arena for public discourse.
And it was not the value of public discourse or truth finding that was at the core of these platforms. It was capturing attention as long as possible in order to sell ads. E.H. Smith, a writer who lived at the time, qualified online public discourse as a debate-themed video game. Those who could play with emotions and push other people's buttons would be rewarded with likes, follows, impressions, retweets, shares, and comments. It was the social status game on steroids, supercharged with advertising. And you could engage anonymously and thus shout even harder and propose more outrageous things than you would do otherwise. Yes. For a while, people thought it was filter bubbles and echo chambers that fragmented and polarized society. But actually the opposite was true. It was the gamification of social interaction that exaggerated group identities. It was like a very big town square, a stadium even, where you could always find someone to pick a fight with. As a consequence, those in the middle, those seeking reasonable dialogue, didn't feel at home in such an unsafe place. All of this creeped into traditional media and news organizations that were into both sidism, always giving a stage to at least two sides of an argument, independent of the truth. And of course, the traditional media at the time also liked spectacle and thus extremes. But, in all fairness, not all online spaces were run like this. Small online spaces like chat rooms were intimate places where people met and friendships grew. Families stayed in touch in app groups, and professional communities could go into deep discussions on all kinds of platforms. And even one of the most popular places online, Wikipedia, was driven by a culture that was digital, open source, and continuously seeking to be accurate, fact-based, and truthful. So I did a little effort to map this out in a diagram. So from little reach to great reach, and from very specific concerns to very general concerns. In other words, the online public sphere was bigger than the spectacles on social media. Then Jopi explained how the world started to change when the US cracked down on the monopolies and the EU forced them to become interoperable and eventually even move their data to a public data chain. At the same time, a new generation of decentralized networks and protocols saw their chance. A new, more diverse social ecosystem started to emerge, ranging from ad-driven to cooperative to donation-based to subscriber-funded and everything in between. Each platform cultivated a different culture, a different aesthetic, different user interfaces, and there was the introduction of algorithmic freedom, which meant that every user could audit the algorithm and could choose, hack, or write their own, depending on how they wanted to navigate the information and social networks on the chain. It resulted in a different kind of social media landscape, where it used to be a walled garden that promoted virality. Now it was a kind of ecosystem with biotopes, cells that had porous walls. While each ecosystem had its own rules of engagement and algorithmic flavor, members could follow and communicate with each other across cell walls. Informational pandemics couldn't spread as easily on the supported public data chains, and users could move freely from one digital biosphere to another without losing their data or their ID. In other words, an abundance of smaller town squares and more cultural diversity made a more resilient public sphere. Later in the 21st century, it became apparent how a new digital culture of trust worked, and that it could fully replace the old system based on printed documentation, bureaucratic logistics, and an objective professional work ethos. The data chain infrastructure and the algorithms navigating them became the new normal. And were also very much needed in a complex society that processed more and more information. That the public data chain was always one click away helped in navigating an information sphere where more and more information wasn't produced by humans anymore, but by bots, sensors, and machine learning. Children started to learn in their schools how to check the chain and how they could verify what they saw. Was the photo of a burning house an original? And if it is a derivative, how so? What does the data chain tell you? Is it connected to other chains of evidence? If the flames were added later and the image was used to disinform people, what would be your course of action? But also for researchers, journalists, and editors, the chain became a key resource in finding sources, correlating data, and finding new connections. You can even make a living as a chain weaver, verifying, falsifying sources, organizing authentication, and in general, deepening trust through connecting sources and augmenting data. Some very old people explained it as the whole web worked like Wikipedia. It gives a hint, but the change is much deeper and more profound. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you so much, Edwin.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, yes. I'm curious, Yona and Nanda, maybe start with you, Yona. What's your very first reaction, your first thought when you hear this scenario?
Oof. Well, there was a lot there. It's super interesting. What is my first reaction? Let me think about it a little bit more. Maybe we can go to Nanda first.
Maybe Nanda has an even faster first reaction. Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah, no pressure. Well,
what does it make you think of?
I think it's really interesting. What it made me think of is biodiversity and the food chain. I think we went through this with our food. Where we wanted to know everything that we eat on our plate, where does it come from, what for moderations were there, all the way to some bureaucratic system where all the cows now have these yellow tags in their ears because we want to know what is this food on my table. I think that this will translate to the data comments that you just mentioned, so I really appreciate that you sketched this scenario. I do think we also need to think, is this the solution to what problem?
Sure, yeah.
And then I think data minimization, we don't need all this data. We need some chain to depend our trust on. So you tell me something and we feel a connection. And what is it based on? Is it based on the way you look at me? Is it based on expertise? Is it based on some digital evidence of what I say is trustworthy?
I think I would love to park this great question for a second. Yeah, the solution to what problem? It's interesting. Yeah. And a little request to either speak a little bit closer to the mic, Nanda.
Sorry.
No worries. Or move it closer to you. Yona, back to you. I mean, never ask an academic for their first reaction, I guess. To think about it first.
No, I think,
but what does it make you think of?
Yeah, no, I found this sort of idea of centralization to decentralization very interesting, because it also kind of speaks to what we are trying to do. Like, everyone with decent programming skills and like a moderate budget can now try to design something that sort of that does something very different than the big websites and the big social media companies try to do, which is indeed, as was also said before, make money, and so the incentives are that, and as a result, there's beautiful and interesting products being built, but they don't always have, let's say, societal cohesion and things like that in mind. But then the question becomes, you can build it, but how can you make people use it on a massive scale? It's kind of what you're seeing a bit with Twitter versus Mastodon now. I don't know about whether you're following this, but all academics are on Twitter, and they're now, some are slowly moving to Mastodon after Elon Musk took over Twitter. And I wonder, like, is this actually going to work, or and do these initiatives actually ever, become, let's say, sufficiently institutionalized that they're like actually a viable alternative? And this is a question I was constantly in the back of my mind when I was.
That's
listening.
also a really good one to take along. Yeah. And before we start kind of filleting the scenario as pointed out to us, let's do a little game of yes and. It's a little bit more like collective speculation here. Like, if you listen to this, like, what else could you see in this future that's unfolding and that's contributing to that new architecture of trust? Like, what else could be there? What aspects or what unexpected developments or what ingredients could you speculate along?
So me again, I think.
Both of you, yeah. Both of you. All of you, actually. Yeah.
Well, I think actually also, let's try to do it together. What also what Jona just said, I think one of the things why it's so hard now, let's say, to start a new thing, like for instance, start a new social media company. It's like insanely hard because you have to compete with the billions and billions of the metas, etc. So, and I think one of the things, for instance, this chain does, because now the network effects are privatized. So the network effects are in the big social media companies or in Google. But this proposal tries to basically make network effects public. And that also means that every new startup can instantly profit from, okay, I make a new app and suddenly everybody from every other network can kind of move over or access each other. So you're like kind of landing in an ecosystem instead of a desert.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically now what you have to kind of build your whole, you have to terraform a planet from scratch. That's how you have to do it now. And I think in this new future, everybody could start much more easily. And if you have a super nice idea, it can make its own community. It has much more opportunity to grow and blossom.
Thanks. And I challenge the next person who speaks to start their sentence with yes and.
Yes and.
Mm-hmm.
We are now building algorithms as specialist experts in IT. And I think what will come is not only the data commons, but also the algorithm commons, where we can have all these building blocks, GitHub-like, Wikipedia-like building blocks that you can add your own functionality to the digital applications that you're using. And it is really easy.
Great. Jona, Christian?
Maybe to continue a little bit on the on this idea of scaling up new initiatives. One upside, I guess, to the existing large social media companies, and even their markets driven is that if you build something and it is shown to attract a lot of people, it is possible that they can be persuaded to take it over, right? Because I think it was said before that the toxicity and vitriol on many social media initially, I think it was indeed for everyone who wanted to pick a fight or get some followers or sell stuff. This was the strategy to go. But I do sometimes optimistically think that this is becoming a bit less, right? It's a small group that does it, and trolls are difficult because, but I do think like a lot of people are also turning away from social media exactly for this reason. So I do think that combined, I could imagine that these social media companies are also looking for an alternative way to design these things. And it's sort of a nice opportunity for those interested in changing that to also convince them to implement other features that may be a bit more
make it more democratic and decentralized. Yeah. Okay, great.
I can also imagine, Jona, I don't know if you see that as well, that a institution like the European Union sort of grows into a commons kind of infrastructure that Edwin just showed. I know they're working on the digital passport, and they're working on these spots. Tim Berners-Lee is working on it, and you have all this ecosystem that is combining digital passports with data vaults, etc. And I could optimistically imagine that that will somehow turn into a law. So you have to have this, first you have to have this digital passport, people will have it, they're annoyed by it, vaults are attached, a chain is attached, and suddenly you have a sort of public standard that will force add-ons to interoperability. I can imagine a more public way of, how do you see that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know a lot about that, but I was just suddenly wondering, maybe Nanda knows or one of you, but are there, let's say, digital public spaces that are public? Because the digital public spaces now are privately owned, right? But do they even exist?
Well, you have, of course, the DigiD. It's not a social.
Yeah, no, but I mean, where people can interact in.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. That's a good. I don't think so.
Does anyone know?
Well, we did one, the Digitale Stad. We had it.
You created one?
No, I didn't. Marleen Sticker did. The Digitale Stad, where we were the first online. And it started from Commons, only
so that was a platform
changed into something
for
privately owned.
But
people in Amsterdam to discuss with each other?
There's a very big one. It's called email.
And email?
Yeah, it's global.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's of course, that's also interesting. I think a lot of, let's say, the public ones are actually very old, like from the 90s, because then basically all these layers of the web were built, but they were public open source infrastructure. So they kind of were... and email, in a way, is a kind of a protocol that's like a completely open protocol. Anybody can attach themselves to the email network.
Yeah.
And with the same logic, the whole World Wide Web is the same public social media
Nanda thing. I'm not sure if she agrees.
Well, actually, the internet was built by the American army.
The World Wide Web.
The web.
Yeah, the web. Yeah, but I think what is interesting that we are not looking at the infrastructure, but we are looking at interpersonal trust.
Right.
And I think interpersonal trust was there, also in the digital world, because we used it mostly for information exchange, and that's quite safe. But then we started to change it, and we had these powerhouses, big tech, that made it unsecure and unsafe. So I think the interpersonal trust is easily organized again in the digital world, but it is strongly intermingled with the big tech powerhouses that keep again and again and again doing the wrong things so that we don't trust them.
Yeah.
But we do trust each other sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And
unless what Jonas is saying in the depolarization.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Nanda, also going back to, solution to what problem and what we're talking about, thank you for bringing back that focus, is interpersonal trust and eroding trust. Do you, if that's what we're trying to solve, do you agree with the directions that we're now talking about? Are they sufficiently credible and effective? Like the interoperability that was mentioned, the algorithmic freedom, public data chains. Is that what we need to go for?
Yeah, I'm really thinking about this really hard. And I came up with the idea of digital integrity. If you feel comfortable in your own personal digital space and you can access other people and there's a good design that not excludes certain groups of people, that can help to build interpersonal trust.
Yeah.
And we are now always facing these really stupid barriers that we don't really need. Here we see digital integrity, the human scale. Think of solutions that are used for humans, and don't make them work so hard on computer systems. Interoperability, I have to send you a Signal message, you a WhatsApp message. Wow, then I have to send an email. I'm working really hard. I'm spending a lot of time behind my screen. It's not necessary. And if you think of digital comfort, there is a difference between comfort and ease of use. Sometimes a lot of things are really easy to use, and a lot of systems, it's really hard, easy, and it's free, and you can download it for free, but you don't feel comfortable. And that's I think, some pointers of how we can work on this.
Yeah.
And in my book I also mention future-proof, that the systems need to be sustainable, it need to work for the next generation. And we don't want to change it over and over again if there's a new business model. So that collects to a new way of organizing the web, a new way of organizing ourselves in a digital society.
How do you see this connecting to because I think maybe there's more layers, but at least I see a kind of design, just like a usability part of it, and there's, let's say, a more infrastructural part of it.
Yeah.
So, and I think, what I presented is more kind of an infrastructural exploration. So how do you see
how does this come back in the
how could
infrastructure?
that attach to this, or how would you, let's say, design the public chain in a different way to accommodate your proposal?
Yeah, this is basically built for the designers or the developers now of IT systems. I think if we use these sort of principles, which are understandable, I hope, for everyone, I hope so, and I have a lot of examples with it, then you start to design differently, and then we can work towards the new infrastructural ways that you are presenting in your scenario that I really like.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting, and I want to add, I think that on a personal level, as a user, you want to feel safe, and you want to have you want to have the experience you just described. But I think there's also another layer to it, and that is that the public space should ideally produce a sense of belonging, and that also needs to be designed in a way. And I think those are sides of the same coin. So the individual should feel safe and free, and but he should also feel a sense of belonging. And so the hospital you just mentioned earlier should be his own hospital in a way.
Maybe you can mention that example again, because then nobody was watching it.
we were here early, and I told you that in a hospital people like to feel safe, and you're in your own small bed and everything is scary, and then someone brings dinner and they put the dinner on a plate, and you cannot reach it. And that's the same with the digital space. If you cannot reach the digital tooling, or it's not usable for you, you don't feel safe. So the hospital idea, it also talks about integrity. And if you have the physical integrity, you cannot take my blood without my permission. But I don't want to know how you're taking it. And I don't want to see it, just take it, if I agree on this. That's the same in the digital space. So if we work on a new infrastructure, and I really like the scenario of this new infrastructure, we shouldn't be bothered with all the technicalities. We want to be bothered about interpersonal trust. How do we organize it? Well, these are the basic principles underlying it. Do we have the systems to support this? Can we do this? These clouds are not clouds. These are huge data centers in the mud, really heavy, non-sustainable data centers. So do we have the right infrastructure, the technical systems, to build this system? Yes, we do. We're just not doing it, because we also have an old pattern of the way we think about this.
Right.
And we have these powerhouses, big tech companies, who have a market interest for it.
So who should be doing it, Nanda? Who should be take responsibility? Because she said this is principles for developers. Are those the ones who should be responsible for building online trust?
Well, they should not be responsible anymore for building irresponsible IT systems. And these are design principles that are built by companies or just in our heads. This is the way we do it. This is the way we always did it. Stop doing it like that and start thinking from your mission. What do you want to achieve? I don't think there's not one developer who wants to build a system that cannot be trusted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think there's also this very interesting divide between. I mean, I've also worked a lot with more the open source crowd and hackers. So they are very conscious about all the ethical issues. And then you see how they work in the systems. And, it's like code, or it's like in terms of design, it's like for somebody who's not technically literate, it's like they cannot do anything with it. So they have, let's say, all the values, right? But it's like unusable for everybody except them almost.
Right. Oh, that's why I said here also human scale.
Yeah.
Design your system in such a way that people can use it.
Yeah.
And it's a design principle. If you think about it, you think, okay, now I'm building this. Oh, this is only for the people who know tech at this level. Then
human skill, menselijke maat.
And then we say, we need to teach the people how to use it.
Yeah.
The hospital nurses, the nurses in the hospital, they have to do so much on the computer. 3 hours out of the 8 hours that they work, they're sitting behind screens.
Yeah.
So do it a different way, and then build. So there's two things, like building on our current systems, and the second is redesigning the system.
Yeah.
And this scenario is about redesigning.
That too.
The developers.
And on that last point, Nanda, and also as a last question to all of you for now, social media gets a lot of attention also, like when we think about interpersonal trust and in the scenario. But there's also digital spaces that we might not directly call social media that function pretty okay now. Is that so, actually? And if yes, what can we learn from those if we want to redesign the current social media structures and all that they're lacking in right now, if it's focused on interpersonal trust? So I'm combining a lot of questions here. But in short, what can we learn from spaces that do work to redesign the social media spaces that don't?
Well, I mean, I showed the graph, right, where I tried to map out a couple of these digital online spaces.
Exactly, yeah.
At least what I got from that is that, let's say, also on your scale probably, which places feel more intimate and more comfortable are usually smaller in scale. It's not like you're on a town square with like half the world's population, but it's like smaller. And it's also a bit the comment of Jonah, so that I thought was very enlightening, is that also when you're on a platform, it's not just like what does the other side think, it's also what do your peers think. Can I go into a discussion with this person? So there's all these kind of social dynamics going on, and basically the bigger the group, the more or less you stay close to yourself.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of let's say tension on spaces like Twitter or Facebook that in a way they're too public. But I mean, they have a strange mix. They're like they try to be like a chat room, but they're actually like a newsroom.
Right.
So it's
right.
I found it also interesting what last week we had a journalist from Bellingcat here, and she told us that people who these QAnon spaces, they are very inviting. So they produce immediately a sense of community. Mm-hmm. And they try to do some information ordering, which is not very rational or based on an objective way, but they do those two main components of a public domain. They order and seek information, and they produce a sense of community. And I think that is very interesting. So and they do it in a flawed way and in an oppositional way, etc., but you see them trying to do what a public space should do in a way. I mean, that was something I took out of it.
Jonah, I would love to hear from you as well. What do we know that works that can help us redesign social media?
Well, I'm thinking a lot since the last 10 minutes about this idea of a publicly funded, large, ambitious social media platform. And the reason I like it a lot is because of a practical reason that we haven't talked about much is, these big tech companies are these platforms that we currently have. They're of course they're immensely popular because they're just super well designed, right? And even though we might not like it, we all spend a lot of time on them, and people want to work there in general. I mean, since Elon Musk took over Twitter, a bit less, but in general, right? These are highly sought after jobs for programmers, and I'm seeing it a lot here in the US, where a lot of people who are doing a PhD here are being recruited by these big tech companies. And even though, on average, people who do a PhD in my field, sociology, political science, are very public-minded people, they have to essentially at some point make sort of a terrible choice between, having a financially stable life in New York versus but doing something they don't really want to do, or going for the very precarious academic PhD life. And I think but now this is sort of, these are their options, right? Whereas, I don't know, the idea of a big state-funded or EU-funded even publicly owned enterprise that sort of is going to compete with these social media platforms, essentially offering the same they offer. So you need a lot of funding for that. And then, being as good as them. I think so what you learn from them is to design something that people really want to use and where people really want to work.
Yeah.
But then you do it with all the right incentives instead. And I think this I really like as an idea.
Yeah, I like your enthusiasm. It's like a seed has been planted in this conversation. Great. Any last super brief reflections from you on this, Nanda?
Yeah, I think we're now talking about the business model too much.
Yeah.
I think we should talk about how can we develop ourselves and how can we use it, make all these different, all the things that we don't like about the big tech companies, we can do that ourselves.
Yeah.
Also, as users, we have a decision to make.
Yeah.
Are we staying on Twitter or are we going to somewhere else? And there's not only Mastodon, there are more.
Exactly.
So
let's definitely keep that as a core question for our next part of our conversation. For now, do we have any questions here that you would like to ask? If not, I would love to invite Benjamin Fro, singer, rapper, born and raised in Amsterdam, to perform his song Selfie for us.
Thank you very much. This song is... Thank you. This song is the opening song on an album that I'm working on, and the album is about being a person in the 21st century, and the world is falling apart and everything. So that's what the album is about, and this is the first song. And I think it really relates to stuff we've been talking about tonight. So here it is. Yeah. All right. It goes selfie, 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 selfie. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag healthy. Selfie, 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 selfie. I'm not stressed. Please don't help me. Fake fans in my real life. Real ones on IG. I don't really care if you got love in your heart, just want you to like me. Touch me, feel me, push me, swipe me. All eyes on that white cube, that's dicey. That's how I roll, I gotta handle the handle, I'm Benjamin Fro. Raising the stakes and making mistakes, I hope you don't cancel me though. History written in scrolls, I'ma be part of the show, yeah. Follow trends and fads, I make friends and ads screaming, hashtag goals. Selfie, 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 selfie. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag healthy. Selfie, 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 selfie. I'm not stressed. Please don't help me. So, I'm posting that food porn, but really I can't eat. Got straight out of bed hair, but really I don't sleep. No, really I don't connect to the pictures that I'm posting. I show you all the emotions you wanna see, but I'm posing. A wanna be happy man And all of these pigs smiling, all of these pixels shining, so follow me quick. I'm in the business of selling you the illusion you could be happy. I'm fit, don't wanna brag, but I'm it. Can somebody tag me? I'm dressed, fresh. Can you tell I'm the best? Will you honestly tell me? Can you see that I'm blessed? Do I look like I'm wealthy? Can you tell I'm a mess? Do I really exist? Is anybody impressed? Selfie, 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 selfie. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag healthy. Selfie, 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 selfie. I'm not stressed, nah. That's me in the club, that's me in the gym, that's me eating sushi, that's me and her friends, that's me and my friends, that's me chilling with my homies, pretending not to be lonely, that's me posing with some shorties, that's me in the club again, that's me and my girlfriend, showing off her peach emoji. I'm glad that you think you know me, hoping you think I'm only just telling you how I feel. I'm glad that you think it's real. I guess you look so good on your phone, I guess you could say I'm phony for real. Selfie.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. I think we needed that. Thank you, Benjamin Fro. I feel you shed some light, like as we go into the second part of our conversation, on the emptiness actually of the disconnection to ourselves. Even it's not only the disconnection to each other; it's also the disconnection to ourselves and who we maybe want to be. So, yeah, in the second part of the conversation, we would love to speak to you on, you already started talking about it actually, but what is really needed to build this interpersonal trust? What is already being done? Like, what do we know works? And to start just with one basic question, and that's the issue of anonymity. Nanda. Why is that so relevant if we speak about the context of online interpersonal trust?
Yeah, anonymity is now sort of a way out, so people can say anything on the social media what they want. But I think anonymity is just for the extreme opinions. But I also noticed that a lot of people now use social media to give an opinion where not an opinion is not asked for. So you have these comments groups of WhatsApp groups, and someone says, well, the front door is broken. And then someone said, well, they should do something about it, and they always are too really late. What is the opinion in this very technical question? Why is it needed? And if you think about anonymity, that triggered also a non-anonymous opinion circuit on social media that is now breaking it down. I'm not interested in a group app if everybody is just always sharing their opinions about everything.
We've conditioned ourselves to just keep sharing opinions. Well, that's
We
not
need
really
an
helpful
opinion.
if it's like a broken door. Like, what is your opinion going to help?
Well, what does it help?
I think it's interesting because I think for us we work more with the concept of social trust. That's perhaps something else than interpersonal trust. Social trust is more perhaps societal. So do you trust the institutions that make the community work? And we live in very abstract communities. So we need very strong institutions and trust in those institutions to make us feel that we belong to a society that consists of millions of people that we don't know personally. And I think that's a difference. So interpersonal trust, I think, well, Jona probably knows more about that, but it's perhaps too limited a term. Social trust is more like, how do you connect to a million people? That
right,
a
it's not like the
million Dutch
bilateral
guys or Dutch girls or 300 and something Europeans, and we share the same institutions. And I think what you just mentioned, that somebody gives a frustration or an opinion about something very technical, what it perhaps shows is that it's a frustration with existing institutions, with the frameworks in which the societal dynamics are organized.
But it seems it can also, as a like what I'm hearing between the lines, it can also just become a habit. Like we're just like so used to just giving our opinion about whatever it is, right? Nanda,
Yeah,
is that,
but,
or how do you?
Yeah.
Well, we are forced to use the digital tooling in a different way than what it was intended for. It was information, it was contact, societal trust is actually broken down for a part by the digital social media and the digital tooling that we have.
Let's zoom in on that for a second, because also from Benjamin's song just now, it is like we are trying to connect, we are trying to reach out, and to each other. And is it necessarily a problem that we are using digital tools for that now?
Well, it's what you say, that there's an empty dislike, as you showed in the scenario, that we keep liking each other and are triggered to do that. That's a feel good. It relates to your societal trust.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are frustrated by a lot of things that don't work.
Yeah.
And where we're saying now, we need a digital passport. And everybody, why do we need a digital passport?
Yeah.
And that triggers a lot of distrust triggers for people. And at the same time, we think that everything should be free and that we can use it all. And we don't think about the negative consequences of all these free apps ourselves, and are very willing to use all this digital tooling that are not trustworthy and that are not responsible.
Yeah, interesting.
And so we break down our own societal trust, and I really appreciate that you mentioned that, by using all this irresponsible software and all this irresponsible digital tooling.
And that's a really interesting bridge to you, Jona, because indeed you're now describing digital tools that actually break down trust, but you research digital tools that break down barriers between people and actually build trust. So do you see ways that we can do that on a larger scale, that social trust that Christian was mentioning? Is there a way to do that? How could we?
That's a really good question. I think it's a really good question. I think the nice thing about these brief online interactions in our case is, and this is something I would love to test, is that they could be sort of a gateway towards more in-depth, more longer, more sustained interactions. And one of the reasons I was interested in whether such a short interaction with someone from the other side, let's say, worked, is that we kind of already know that very long, more sustained interactions between different groups, that produces prejudice. But that is very, very hard to organize at scale. And in this case, only a very brief interaction that people would be, possibly willing to try out. It did already have quite significant effects. And so, it would be interesting to see whether whether people would be, for example, much more open to meet up and to discuss along dividing lines after just doing this for a very short while. And maybe also on this point of anonymity, because I was thinking how, right, it's now presented as something bad, and I think often, right, and I think in the domain of social media, there are very good reasons for that point, because people do indeed permit themselves way more than they would otherwise do. In our specific case of these interpersonal interactions, my hunch is that anonymity also is sort of makes it easier to break barriers because there are fewer barriers. So especially when talking across divides, people do tend to draw sort of conclusions based, as we all know, on all kinds of, let's say, exterior features of people, gender, etc. And maybe these interactions take longer, right, to sort of get off the ground well, when you also have to sort of deal with the fact that these people are very different from you in other ways as well. Whereas the way in which you organize it in the anonymous setting allows you to immediately talk about the thing that you are divided on. And I do wonder about this is something I want to study as well.
How do you make sure in that setting that it doesn't, disintegrate into a more hateful conversation? Or are there tools on how you moderate that?
Yeah, I mean, people could, of course, always exit, and people could report each other. So if right, I mean, of course, we made sure that that people weren't stuck with someone who was being hateful, which is, of course, something you can't totally avoid. And we do see sometimes, right? I mean, on average, we find that it depolarizes people, but of course, averages are averages. So like 10-15% of conversations actually do get quite heated. And people polarize a bit more, but on average, it seems to work. So in that way.
Can I add what the whole idea of like getting together with people from all kinds of different backgrounds is that you adjust yourself during the process of engaging each other. You adjust your predecessors, right? So isn't that the whole point that you, if you are, let's say, a white male from 65 or older, and you engage a black woman, a young black woman, and you don't know, then you wouldn't overcome those prejudices. And then so you have a really good conversation, and in your mind, you're talking to an equal, or in your mind, somebody who is the same as you, but you will never learn that it's actually someone who you have a lot of prejudices against.
Could you briefly react to that, Jonah? How do you see that?
Yeah, it's an open question. It is very interesting. I think that either what you say is right. So the prejudice reduction that takes place in this anonymous conversation doesn't extend beyond this conversation, and especially not when you learn how people look like or what they sound like or whatever. Another way, right, that could also be the case is that you first, right, because then the question is, what does this conversation do? And I'm trying to, with analyzing these chats from the experiment, not from the open thing, I try to sort of get an idea, what happens here. And what seems to happen is people, they all kinds of sort of mechanisms through which interactions can polarize become depolarized in this conversation. So people, for example, usually think the other side has terrible arguments for their positions, but actually they learn, they're actually people who also think about why they hold these positions, or they feel included in the conversation. So there's all kinds of things that happen that increase understanding. And I think, it's very much possible that when you then find out that this person looks a certain way or talks a certain way, you have already become warmer towards this person. So it might sort of
maybe should have a slowly
extend into that domain as well.
A slowly emerging identity.
Yes, reveal aspects of yourself.
A slowly emerging identity. So first you connect, and then oh my God.
Nanda, I would like to go to this underlying point that you've tried to raise a couple of times now, which is around, this deeper shift in mentality that we need to develop ourselves, as you've been saying, to start rebuilding this trust, or to start building an architecture of trust that actually works. Can you say a little bit about that, and how you see that, and what is that shift?
Yeah, I really think that you asked me this question. I always look at the Op1 and the talk shows in the normal media, the traditional media, and they also have these discussions. So you say A and you say B. And then at one point during the summer, there was a new presenter, and then he said, let's solve a problem. And I thought, this is a whole new way to reach out to each other. We immediately become a team because we want to solve this. And I have this perspective, you have this perspective, and how can we use these different perspectives to solve a problem? And I also ask you on your scenario, what problem are you solving? Well, we're solving lots of problems, and one is the way we work. And it also is about who we are as human beings. And I think the psychology of how we are dealing with our problems in the world, or our challenges, we can make it more positive, is really traditional, really old school. Let's get some really experts and let them solve it.
Yeah.
And then there's a new team, and it says, well, we don't need only the experts, it needs to be inclusive, so we need to get the users in.
And we
as well.
actually have the tools for that right now.
Yeah, but we have the tools, but is that a solution?
Yeah.
Maybe the experts can do it better, and we don't need all these people.
All these opinions.
Disturbing this whole process. And how can we think about the new systems not in the system development, but in human development. The way that we want to connect to each other. You said, well, we now have the digital tooling to connect to 1 million people at the same time. I don't want to be connected to 1 million people. I really would like to have my 2 best friends one night at my home at the evening. That should also be possible. And I think the scenario that you put into is possible, but the digital systems are there. The only ones who need to change are we, as human beings, the way we want to trust each other, the way we want to connect to other people. And we are very, we are committing very soon to very bad software.
And that's also maybe about some of the values that you shared earlier, about integrity, about, not unnecessarily discomfort, causing each other discomfort. How do you think we can reach that shift? Because that seems even more complicated, maybe.
Well, it will happen, of course. Every new generation will do new things. In the 70s, it was a really sexist, smoking generation. And we thought it was normal.
Yeah.
And we never realized that sexist and racist people are bad people. Of course, they're not bad people. They're just ignorant. And we now have the same thing with our digital systems and the way we are working. We are ignorant. And what I really like are the good examples. And I really like your software that you say, okay, people connect to each other. We're using the digital tooling in a different way, not to break down trust, but to build trust.
Yeah.
I really like the GitHub community. The GitHub community is built on...
GitHub community?
The GitHub.
GitHub community.
GitHub community is where developers share their code. Sometimes it's showing off, look what I made. And I solved the same problem with better code. Cool. But you can use it. It's not owned by certain people. It's not about power. It's about sharing, about solving a problem yourself. And same in hackathons. I'm in my world again, developers. So in hackathons, we use interdisciplinary views to solve a problem.
Yeah.
To attack a challenge. And I think if we do that in news shows, if we do that in Twitter and everything.
And that's a very interesting point. And I think that's where the institutions come in. Because we are a community. Like, we're all Amsterdammers. Well, I don't know. But so we have a certain set of common problems and common challenges that we need to solve together. And that needs a platform on which it is solved, which are now very old school institutions. And the ones who execute it are very old school. So I think, and that's what we're going to talk about next week, but when you shift a public domain from one information technology to another, you will probably also need to shift the decision-making institutions and executive institutions that will be more compatible with the new digital domain. Because then you get a feeling that you are solving problems together. Oh, we need a new road. Do we need a new road? Yeah, we need a new road. Okay, how do we gonna, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's a very practical way of people coming together and having to overcome their former differences.
Yeah, now of course, I mean, I think that's also the road is a good example, because that's also the frustration, right? You have like an old school printed document based municipal apparatus, and then you have the whole neighborhood who's on WhatsApp and has all they can talk to each other, and like, I'm mad about this, I'm mad about. So it's like also the kind of the local community empowered by digital, the old institutions empowered by literacy and printed documents, and they interface super badly. So both sides are frustrated. They don't really trust, the people in the neighborhood, and the people are suspicious about like this unaccountable, untransparent bureaucracy. So it's a lot of friction between partly two different information cultures.
Yeah. I would love to check in with our audience, see if there's any questions or points you would like to raise. Also, at home, you can use menti.com, as we said, and code 28081914. Are there any points or yes? There's a mic for you.
Yeah, because you are talking about the trust. Do we need to trust each other to use the digital spaces, or do we need to trust the big tech company, how they are using our data?
It's a question for me.
Yeah.
We cannot trust the big tech companies with our data, but they're still doing it. We need to trust each other.
Why?
In connecting to each other. If I share my digital space with you, I need to make sure that I can trust you to feel free and to feel comfortable in my own digital space. If you invade my if you invade my privacy or you invade my comfort, you can blame the big tech company, but I'm blaming you if you are abusive to me in a digital environment, or if you start filming me or exposing me the sexting and all the issues. I should be able to connect on an interpersonal level in the with digital tooling with someone else without being exposed or without being abused. Or
if I want to add to that, or if I may add to that, I think how you produce interpersonal trust with random people is mostly that you recognize someone as having the same values and norms as you. So you can rely on another's value system. And this alignment of values and norms, that's one of the functions of a healthy public domain. So because that produces a sense of belonging in community.
So are you saying like also across like the political spectrum, or people that share very different political viewpoints, for instance, do they still need to have a shared set of values and norms to be able to trust each other?
On
and
a
talk to
very
each other?
basic anthropological level, they have a shared set of values and norms. They just extrapolate.
They need to see that in each other to be able to have that trust.
Yeah, but it's...
No, I mean it's this basic idea of it's known as high trust and low trust societies. So let's say a low trust society, you don't really have functioning institutions and bureaucracies. So all trust is mostly informal, family, very close ties, because you basically don't trust the police or the judge, right?
Yeah.
High trust societies, let's say Holland or Netherlands example in a lot of, let's say, developed economies. So they have, let's say, a functioning institution. So if somebody does me wrong, I go to the police, I actually trust them, or I can sue somebody, and I trust that this system will be objective to a degree. Of course, you can have a discussion about that, but that's, let's say, the model. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And that also implicitly suggests that, let's say, on the street, that, I trust the shopkeeper that I don't know. I trust people will behave in a certain way in the street, and I have no clue about their political views or whatever. But there's a kind of base layer that we kind of trust each other here, and that we can expect certain things to happen and certain things not to happen. And I think that's, let's say, this interpersonal trust with complete strangers, which is a kind of the foundation upon which all the other stuff happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Does that help with your question? Not really?
Yeah, but still I feel the trust is between we as a user and the big company. Because when I'm connecting with someone in the digital space, because I trust that person. But the problem is how this big company, they are using our data.
Yeah, they're
Nanda, did you want to?
Yeah, what I can connect to is we are very trustworthy of the digital tools ourselves.
Unfortunately.
I was in the supermarket and the people behind the cashier asked me, what is your birth date? And I said, why do you need my birth date? Well, I have an app and I need to fill in your birth date. I said, okay, well, the 1st of 1981. I'm almost 60 years, so just lie. And I heard everybody around me answering honestly what their birth date was.
Right.
And there's no function of your birth date when you buy grocery.
Yeah.
And that's what you call a high trust.
Yeah,
I call it naive. It's naive
it's
trust.
No, but it's what we need to organize with billions of people.
Yeah.
We need high trust. But we don't need these companies that misuse those trusts.
Exactly.
But we
for
don't need to change.
interests.
But you suggest change yourself. I say no,
lie
change
to
the
big
company, change the public sphere.
Yeah.
You don't want a space where you have to lie.
Yeah.
You want a space where you can be honest. That's what we need.
I'm sure we are going to.
No, but that's what we need to change.
Exactly, because right now there are a lot of private.
Play the system and change the system. And play the system is lying, and change the system is building a better system.
Yeah, I would go for the second.
Yeah, definitely.
I would never encourage people to lie.
Please do.
Well, but
this is a very important value for you, Christian.
Yeah.
It is time to round off. We've come to the end of our hour and a half. But I feel this is very good input for the next conversation as well.
Definitely, sure.
But I do want to ask you, both of you, Edwin and Christian, just super briefly, what is a key insight that you gained from this conversation?
I liked a lot that this kind of spectrum of anonymity, like when is it good, when is it not good, and again with the Jonah explained also in this very intimate setting again, it can be very valuable. So it's very interesting how being known or not known, or to what degree, is related with trust. And it's not a linear, very direct relationship, and that was a nice new angle I got from this.
Nice. Great. Christian?
Yeah, I agree, and I also liked the framework of how safety is organized, the model you showed us. I think that's very interesting. I really want to look into that, of how trust is designed on a very personal, in a personal experience level, and perhaps coded into something. And I also thought that I used to play that political social media thing a lot, and I connected a lot with Christian, like SGP and ChristenUnie. I had really nice conversations with these people, and I felt a lot of empathy towards them somehow. But I never sort of connected. I should look into that. I'm really curious. I'm very curious about your work and how that actually works.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And how empathy or trust is produced in such a situation.
Yeah. That's okay. I mean, I'm happy.
No, but I really felt, I don't know, I thought, I understand that is your opinion. I understand where you're coming from. And I understand from your experience, you could have that.
Yeah, exactly
view.
what Jonah was describing, actually. I had a very different experience, I must say. But that's for another time. All right, if I try to summarize everything that we discussed today around interpersonal trust is, and thank you so much, all of you, and our special guests, Jonah and Nanda, for sharing so much of your insight. First of all, what Christian pointed out, that this is also really about this underlying desire to create community and indeed find shared values and norms that we can work with, and that we can find each other to communicate, to move forward, to move through. It's good to be aware of where we're coming from, this untransparent, unaccountable system, market-oriented, and also what Jonah pointed out of there's a lot of different views, which is okay, but then we start really hating each other for the different views, which is not great, right? What we said, and the scenario that took us through, or that kind of revealed that the gamification of social interaction is really a big issue, or that's one way of interpreting it. And what we could look for is some of these different elements of user control and free algorithms and public data chains, and we can keep expanding on that. We did expand on that with, thinking about how decentralization could really work, algorithm commons that you brought in, Nanda, and also have the companies that are currently ruling the show be on board in democratizing this. And then lastly, we went to how can we actually move forward in building interpersonal trust? What are some of the really important insights there? And Nanda shared 4 very valuable principles of digital integrity, the human skill, digital comfort, and being future-proof, so really thinking ahead. And then on a kind of human level, Jona pointed out that it's actually also quite challenging to connect to people who think differently from you, but it helps us hate each other a little bit less. And that depolarization that you need, maybe that real, or it can be anonymous, but real connection. And I liked that spark of this publicly funded, social media version where we can use everything we know that works, but not have the profit-oriented incentives. And lastly, this very important point that, we also need to take back how we want to organize and do this, not outsource it to a couple of people who we think know what they're doing, but really up to us and look at our own psychology in this and, how do we want to trust and how do we want to engage and how do we want to connect and how do we then translate that to the digital realm. So thank you for that rich conversation once again. We will be back with the Designing Cities for All series next Monday, same time, the 21st at 8 p.m. And in that third episode, we'll focus on that institutional trust and, who gets to decide and how can we learn to trust in this new digital governance as well. If you want to know more, there's this great podcast with Chrononauten, the Chrononauts, up on Pakhuis de Zwijger on the website. You can also become a friend of Pakhuis. These programs will always be free and accessible and with a lot of integrity. And it's great if people want to support that mission. You can scan the QR code that you will see in a second to do that. Thank you so much for watching. You can go to dezwijger.nl/DCFA to learn all about Designing Cities for All. And for now, I wish you a great evening and thank you so much, all of you, for being here with us.